When it seems like everything is getting exponentially more expensive, there are still some brands trying to offer a great bike for those on a budget. In this video, a review of the Primos Dame, or Dame, which is a steel-framed, budget-conscious gravel bike advertised to be able to do everything, all for a pretty reasonable $800 US in early 2025. So I'll start the video by discussing the bike in its stock form, as it would come out of the box, and then I'll talk about some of the changes that I've made during the testing period, and then I'll wrap up with some of the criticisms that I have with the bike. So for starters, the frame and fork are chromoly steel, and the main triangle uses double-butted tubing, which I take to mean that the chainstays and the seat stays use straight gauge tubing to save a little bit on cost. The group set is the totally appropriate MicroSHIFT Sword 1x group set with an 11 to 46 tooth 10-speed cassette paired with a 44 tooth chainring up front. Now I've said this in at least half a dozen videos at this point, but the Sword group set is in my opinion the best budget-friendly group on the market today. It's unapologetically modeled after Shimano's GRX group, but it uses mechanical disc brakes and it maxes out at 10 speeds. The drifters feel great in the hands and the lever action is light and responsive. Now on this bike, the brakes are another big talking point as well. The calipers are pretty basic, but the bike comes with compressionless brake housing installed from the factory. Now this is another feature that I've mentioned in several videos, but the stiffness and relatively low friction offered by this housing makes any mechanical disc brake like an order of magnitude better in terms of lever feel and sheer braking power. Even on relatively cheap mechanical disc calipers, it's the compressionless housing more than anything that really makes a night and day difference in the braking performance. Now my personal metric for minimum braking power on any bike is that I should be able to lock up the rear tire from the hoods while seated, and with the Primos it's not a problem. Now the wheels are actually a surprise spec as well. The bike comes with a pair of alloy 650B wheels and some generic Novatec hubs, but the spokes are legitimate Pilar butted spokes which add strength and save a little bit on weight. Now typically a stock wheel set on a complete bike will mostly be an afterthought, and I generally expect to save 2 to 3 pounds by upgrading to a nice set of wheels and tubeless tires. However, in this case, when I swapped to a set of Hunt Alloy 650B wheels and the Terravale Sparwood set up tubeless, it actually only dropped the weight of the bike by just over a pound, which was kind of surprising. And that really points to the fact that the stock wheels aren't really as heavy and sluggish as I was expecting. Now we'll also discuss this a little bit more later, but the stock rims come with a 27mm inner rim width, which is pretty uncommon for budget bikes, and this wide rim bed is a much better match for the wide 50mm tires that come with the bike. But again, a little bit more on this later. Now, I will talk about the geometry in just a second, but before I get too deep into the weeds here on the bike spec, I want to just talk about how the bike rides. Now, out of the box, this size medium Dame on my scale weighs in at 27.86 pounds or 12.6 kilograms with pedals. And if I subtract the weight of my Shimano M520 clipless pedals, which weigh in at 0.82 pounds or 374 grams, we get essentially a 27 pound or 12.2 kilogram bike, which is not lightweight by any means. But what I will say is that when riding, it doesn't necessarily feel like a 27-pound bike, and it motors along nicely once you get it up to speed. Now I'd credit a lot of this to the Continental Terra hardpack semi-slick tires, which have some knobs on the sides, but a relatively smooth center patch which helps the bike to roll along more efficiently than a true knobby tire. On the climbs, however, I definitely struggle a little bit, I'll admit. Now you have to keep in mind, I've gotten a little bit soft riding an S-Works Crux around for the past couple of months. That gravel bike weighs literally 10 pounds less than the Primos, and I can definitely feel it on any grade steeper than, say, 6 or 7%. On the descents, however, the Primos tends to just truck over everything. I think the combination of the 50mm wide tires and the butted steel frame and fork really have the effect of muting some of the trail vibrations, and the ride is pretty smooth, even over semi-chunky gravel. And then of course when I put on the Hunt alloy wheels with the 2.1 inch wide Sparwood set up tubeless, run at low pressure, the bike actually is legitimately comfortable. Now one thing I haven't mentioned is all of the mounts on the frame and fork. So you get 3 bosses on the top tube, you get space for 2 water bottles, there are rack and fender mounts on the frame and fork, the fork crown is drilled, and you get 3 mounts on each fork leg. So clearly this bike was meant to be loaded up with bags and gear and take you on an adventure. It's clearly been designed to be super versatile, but the geometry is actually pretty sporty. So if you compare the Dame to the Blackheart all-road bike that I've reviewed in the past, they're actually really similar. Now I'm comparing a size 52 Blackheart to a size medium Dame, which is actually something I'll mention in a little bit, but the stack and reach on these two bikes are identical. They also have really short chainstays at around that 425 mark, and they both have a short wheelbase, hovering around that 1000 millimeter mark. Although I will say that the trail on the Dame is slightly higher than the Blackheart at 70.4 millimeters. Anyways, the point that I'm trying to make is that the Primos is, well, it's interesting in that I'm not exactly sure who it's for. The geometry suggests that it's meant to be ridden fast and aggressively, but the mounts and the utilities suggest that it's meant to be loaded up for a weekend bikepacking trip. And to be honest, I think that's kind of the point. Talking to Pascual and Carlos, who own Primos, they wanted to do their best to create a bike that could basically do a little bit of everything without breaking the bank. Now, in my case here, I kind of took that as an invitation to mess around with it a little bit and sort of make it my own. After having it in what I'll call fast mode with clipless pedals and the quicker Hunt wheels and tires, I was kind of getting like dad bike vibes from the Dame, and I actually swapped the stock handlebars to the Ritchie Buzzard handlebars, which are a super wide, flat, or we'll call it an alt bar, with 70 millimeters of rise for a nice comfortable riding position. These handlebars also have a ton of back sweep, making it super comfortable to cruise around town on, but they're not so swept back that it makes it awkward to bomb down a dirt trail. And because the MicroSHIFT group set uses mechanical disc brakes, and because all of the MicroSHIFT 10-speed stuff is cross-compatible, the flat bar conversion was really straightforward. It's literally just swapping the shifters and levers over to the new handlebars. Now I've got the MicroSHIFT trigger shifter here, which is compatible with the Sword derailleur, and these Shimano Sword levers can be switched between short pull and long pull ratios. So they're basically compatible with any mechanical brake, and all of these components are really affordable as well. The entire conversion cost less than $100, and it took me less than 15 minutes to swap over. And I have to say, I really think that this bike might be in its final form for me. It's been super fun to cruise around on the bike in this configuration, and then with the flat pedals on it now, it's been my go-to for riding around with the kids, but it's still capable enough for when the kids want to go exploring off-road. I think the only thing that I might still do is to put a rack on the front so that it's got some carrying capacity as well. Now, there's a lot to unpack with the design and the component selection for this bike. Some things I really like, and others I'm not a huge fan of. And so I'll do my best to summarize here as best I can. So starting with the design choices that I think make the Primos an outstanding choice, well, first is the fact that it adopts modern through-axle hub mounting right out of the box. When budget brands are designing a new bike, there's always compromises to be made, and the game is basically to choose where to prioritize and where to make sacrifices. And many budget brands are still using the quick release 135 hub standard, which is in and of itself not really a bad thing. There's nothing technically wrong with it. It just makes upgradability a little bit of an issue because it's really hard to find decent disc-compatible modern wheel sets that use the quick release standard. The other thing that I was pleasantly surprised to see is that it comes with an external BSA bottom bracket and crankset. Now again, typically on a budget bike, you'd expect to see the older style square taper bottom bracket, which again is not a problem technically speaking, but square taper cranksets are pretty limited. And so if you ever wanted to upgrade cranks, you'd almost certainly be looking at a crank and bottom bracket upgrade. Now one thing that wasn't immediately apparent is that when you have really wide tires like these 50 millimeter tires, a narrow rim profile would make the tire kind of balloon out and have that sort of like light bulb cross section, which if you've ever ridden a tire that's too wide for the rim, it feels a little bit more squirrely than when the rim is the proper width for the tire. Essentially you get some unwanted side to side flex in the tire that can make the ride feel a little bit weird. Anyways, I was curious, so I actually measured the inner rim width, and I was really pleased to see that these rims have an inner width of 27 millimeters. Now it's pretty typical for budget bikes to spec like a 19 to 21 millimeter inner rim width, so it's nice to see Primos speccing an appropriate rim for the tire. And I also forgot to mention that while there are only 3 sizes that the company offers at the moment, the cranks are actually size specific, which was a very pleasant surprise. So the medium frame gets a 165 millimeter crank, the large frame gets a 170 millimeter crank, and the extra large gets 175 millimeter cranks. Now to me this makes perfect sense because a lot of cyclists are recently coming around to the idea that the crank length should match the rider just as much as the frame. And so slapping 175 millimeter cranks on every size in the range makes absolutely no sense. And the fact that Primos have thought through this and offer size-specific cranks on all their bikes, well, it's just really nice to see. And then of course all the stuff I mentioned earlier, the MicroSHIFT Sword group, the compressionless housing, the choice to offer a steel frame with tons of mounts, but also keep the geometry nice and sporty. These are all things that I really think make this bike stand out from the rest. And I'm predicting that this bike will sell really well as it definitely has mass appeal to a wide range of cyclists. So what about the things that I dislike about the bike? Well, there aren't too many, but the one thing that stood out right away to me was that the bike feels overgeared. Now, you do get a 44 tooth chain chainring and a 46-tooth big cog on the cassette, which is technically lower than a 1-to-1 gear ratio, but given the bike's weight and the inclination toward bikepacking or light touring, I'd much rather sacrifice some of that top-end speed for a lower climbing gear. If it were me, I would probably spec this bike with a 40-tooth chainring at minimum, maybe even a 38-tooth. I also think that the sizing is a little bit strange. I would think that since the company is only offering 3 sizes at the moment, that they would be small, medium, and large. Just seems to make sense. And the medium frame that I've been riding, according to most other geocharts, would be closer to a 52 frame, like we saw with the Blackheart Allroad earlier, which by most accounts would be considered a small frame. Now, I don't think it's a huge deal, and if the potential consumer is consulting the geometry charts anyways, then it's not really going to be a problem. But I do think that the sizing is a little bit odd. And then this is kind of a nitpicky one, but I do think that the website needs to be updated with correct and consistent information about the bike. Now, it's very likely by the time you're watching this video that the website's already been updated, but at the time that this video went live, there are several inconsistencies with the information on the website. The first thing that stood out to me was that the weight of a size medium Dame is a claimed 22 pounds in one place, but at another place on the website is 26 pounds. And according to my scale, a size medium comes in at 27 pounds. Now, I believe that this was most likely just a typo, but when I was browsing the website initially before I received the bike, I was honestly really excited that a bike at this price point and of this spec would only weigh 22 pounds. So I was mildly disappointed when I picked up the bike for the first time and confirmed that it's indeed much heavier than I had expected. Another inconsistency is that the hubs say that they're center lock, but the rotors actually use a more traditional 6-bolt mounting system. The frame specs show double-butted tubing for the main triangle, which makes sense, but then again, so does the fork, which very does not make sense. It also says that it'll fit a 700C by 40mm tire in one place, but at another place it says it'll fit 700C by 47mm, which to me is a pretty big discrepancy, and potential customers would probably want to know the exact size tire that would fit. Now, luckily for you, I've been able to test fit a couple of 700C wheels with different tire sizes. What you're seeing here is a 700C by 45mm. This is a Pirelli Cinturato Gravel M tire mounted to some Logos Epoque wheels with a 24mm inner rim width. And then in this clip here, I've got some Rene Hurst Oracle Ridge tires. These are 700C by 48mm, mounted to a Craft Wheelworks wheel with, I think, also a 24mm inner rim width. And both of these tires are inflated to about 25 PSI. So you can kind of see what the clearances look like for both of these tire setups. So anyways, it's a lot of little inconsistencies and inaccuracies like that on the website that kind of makes me question some of the other specs. Now again, these are easy fixes. They're probably just legitimate typos, and they're probably already fixed by the time you're seeing this video. And then the last thing I'll mention is the weight. Now, I get that the guys at Primos wanted to offer a steel frame. It'll last forever, and it's definitely got that cool factor. After all, steel is real. But it does definitely come with a pretty substantial weight penalty. Again, with pedals and bottle cages, we're at well over 27 pounds for a size medium, which is definitely on the heavy side. Now, I'm definitely not suggesting that they do the Primos in an aluminum frame with a carbon fork. I think that'll completely change the vibe of the bike, although it would definitely drop a couple of pounds off the overall weight. In fact, if the Dame was an alloy frame carbon fork gravel bike, it would be extremely close in spec to the Poseidon X Ambition gravel bike, which is another budget gravel offering, and I actually think a comparison between these two bikes probably deserves its own video, which is something that I'm working on now. But the point is, the Dame does in fact feature a chromoly steel frame and fork, which does carry a pretty substantial weight penalty. So if you're looking for a super lightweight bike, keep in mind that a chromoly frame may not be your best bet. Anyways, I realize that's a lot for one video. I'm definitely going to do that comparison video between the Primos and the Poseidon, so stay tuned for that if you're interested. If you have any questions about the Dame or my experience with it so far, just leave them down below and we'll do our best to get back to as many as we can. Thanks again for watching, and thanks for subscribing to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you next time.